Hey friends, welcome to the Interested to Lead podcast. I'm Danita Cummins, and today we are diving deep into the framework of the Contextual Leader with Dr. Torben Norby, who is the CEO of People and Performance, experts in leadership development since 2007, and he's the author of the book Contextual Leader. He has a huge heart for equipping leaders and helping organizations be successful. He has over 3 decades of leadership experience spanning across his military service, retail operations, and as a global consultant. And he's here today to share all of his data, knowledge, and tools that he has developed to help us be better leaders and to help our organizations grow. So grab your cup of coffee and a pen, and let's get started.
Doing things alone is entirely overrated. We all need a community to thrive. And that's why I'm part of an online community of writers and speakers, podcasters, and entrepreneurs called Creatives. And I love it. In the years since I joined this community, I've launched new ideas, and I finally executed the dreams that sat on the shelf for years. Seriously. And I was able to do this because of the outstanding group of mentors, exceptional training, and encouraging mastermind groups with my new friends who did and continue to give me invaluable feedback. Oh, and not to mention all the fun, because we have had lots and lots of fun. Have you ever said, I want to write a book? Or do you want to use your voice for the exciting world of podcasting? If so, Called Creatives is your best resource for up-to-the-minute industry training, expert advice, live coaching, and peer support like no other. Best-selling authors and speakers Allie Worthington and Lisa Whittle lead this community with a no-competition mission, and it shows. So join my friends and I in the Called Creative community. Head to my show notes, danitacummins.com/podcast. and click the link to get all the details to join. I promise you won't regret it. I look forward to seeing you in the community and watching you grow.
Okay, hey guys, thanks so much for joining me on the Interested to Lead podcast. I'm Danita Cummins, and today I am super excited. This is going to be probably more of a classroom session for Danita with Dr. Torben Norby, and he is the CEO of People and Performance. He's an expert in leadership development and organizational coaching and consulting. He has a vast background of many years serving in the military space and just helping different organizations grow and thrive, which we love. And he's the author of the book, The Contextual Leader, which for you that are watching, I'm going to hold it up. It's this beautiful, amazing book that I personally have my own copy of. And so we're going to dig into all of the tools and frameworks that he has written about in his new book. And so I'm excited to share his wealth of knowledge with you today. Thank you so much, Dr. Norby. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate, and I look forward to the dialogue.
You're very welcome. As I said, kind of in the intro, just about your experience in writing the book, which I know we're going to dig into today. But do you want to tell a little bit about your story and how you came to be where you are today?
Absolutely. I'll be delighted to. So basically, you can say that my interest in leadership started way back when I was a boy. I was a scout. And after scouting and growing up and after high school, I joined the Army, as you just referred to. I was an NCO. I drove a tank, led some people, and then I went to Officers Academy and became an officer. And that was where my interest for leadership really sparked. And after 10 years in the Army, I left the Army. I went into retail, became an operations manager. And after a period in that, I turned to HR and started doing leadership development, first in retail. Then I shifted into a global company doing heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, responsible for organizational change and global development of leadership. I worked with that for some years. This journey gave me shifts in my context. So very different from the Army to retail, from retail to a global setting. And that sparked my interest. And that was the reason I became an external consultant. And I did so in 2007, founding People and Performance together with a couple of other people. And I've been working in that field ever since. So I develop leadership academies for large international corporations. I do organizational development. I do executive team development. And all of that journey of being exposed to different contexts, that's really my interest. That also led to the doctorate, the research that's behind the book. So in 2016, I started that journey at the Henley Business School in the United Kingdom. The first 1.5 years, that's a master in business and management research. And then you go into the doctorate. That's 3 years of studying the theme that's of your interest, doing research at the PhD level, but you have to have a practical application part also in the doctorate. So I did that, and that formed the basis for understanding leadership context, all the contextual factors that have an impact on leadership and organizational performance. So since 2021, where I finalized the doctorate, I spent a couple of years writing the book, alongside developing the Leadership Context Inventory, a tool for measuring these organizational factors. And that's what led to the book. So basically, the exposure to seeing leadership requiring very different things in different organizations, in different settings, that's the base of my interest. And that's the reason I wrote the book. And that's the reason I do the work I do. So that's a bit about the background.
That is so amazing, really. And I have had a sneak preview, like I said, of the book. I got my copy and I've been digging in it and through it. And so you're right. I mean, you can just see from the time you open the pages right in the beginning of the book, at least to the pieces that I've gotten a chance to go through, like just this wealth of data and knowledge and information that is rooted underneath this, what I would consider a very practical, easy to understand framework. So I know we're going to jump into the contextual leadership framework, all of those pieces, the assessment tools that you developed. But I just want to say that to anyone who's listening. It's a deep work that you're saying that you've rooted just years of your professional life, your personal life, studying data and the science of leadership and organizational growth behind this book. So super excited for that. So do you want to first start with what you say in the book, that leadership is contextual? And you've said that a couple of times. But can you kind of explain that as we start this journey on contextual leadership framework? What do you mean by that statement?
Absolutely, I can. And thank you very much for the feedback on the practicality, because that's absolutely the aspiration. So leadership is complex. There's a lot of different dimensions to leadership. And there's a lot of leadership literature out there saying if you do those 5 things, you'll have success. And there are things that are important no matter where you are. You need to be interested in people and you need to influence people. That's at the heart of leadership. But when we talk about contextual leadership, that's because when you are in different settings, it requires different leadership approaches. And that means that if you are leading in a risk-intensive environment, there are different approaches to leadership that if you are leading in a stable, non-risky environment. If you're leading people that are spread over a vast geography, you have to lead over the distance. And that's a different leadership discipline than if you lead people that are in the same office or on the same manufacturing site every day. So when we talk about leadership being contextual, that's the offset, understanding this. And then there are basically 2 things that we need to understand. One thing is that we need to understand that leadership exists to drive the energy, the focus of the organization towards the aims and objectives of the organization. So the first part of organizational leadership, and thereby also contextual leadership, is to understand the intentions of the organization. And then converting those into saying, but what does that mean for me as a leader? What is the outcomes that I need to produce? So this intense focus on outcomes coming from an organizational intention perspective is the starting point. The second part is, then I need to recognize the context I'm operating in. We've got an external environment. Some are operating in a very dynamic environment where things change all the time. Others are operating in a more stable environment. And in that manner, we've got 5 external factors. They're converted into some structures and some cultures. And I am saying cultures in plural in the organization. Those come together to form a force field that stands on the people composition, which means that we need to recognize that we've got different people in the organization. They are governed by different processes and structures. They have formed habits over time that form the different components of the culture. All of this sustain performance in a certain way. So as a leader, I need to understand that. Those 2 components, understand the organizational intentions and understand the context I'm leading in, allows me to do the 2 things that are basically the levers of contextual leadership. 1, match the context to lead effectively. So I need to understand the context and then say, I'm going to dose my leadership and I'm going to choose a couple of different leadership approaches depending on the context I'm in. And the other side is I need to relate to the context and then say, how well does that support our strategic aspirations and the requirements from our operating model? And sometimes we need to shape culture, change structures, work with the people composition, raise the expertise levels to ensure that we've got the best possible context to support what we're trying to achieve. So if we make a shift in strategy, if we merge two organizations, if the external environment changes, all of these requires that the leader says, how do I influence the context to be in line so that it supports performance best possible? So that was a lot of words. So if I'm kind of summing it up, as a contextual leader, you need to understand the context you lead in. Based on that, you need to match the context and you need to shape the parts of the context that are not optimal to support performance. So that's basically at the essence. And as you said, the book is quite a brick. So the first 75 pages of the book, that lays out the approaches to match the context and to shape the context. The remaining 500 pages of the book, that gives you insight into each of the different factors that are at play. It explains in detail how it relates to the other factors. I provide examples from real life cases. And then the chapters and the sections ends with, so if you as a contextual leader want to do something about this, here is what is most important to do. So that means that as a leader, when you read the book, you read the first 75 pages, then you start navigating saying, but out of those 30 factors that's in the framework, which are the 3 or 4 most important for me? And then you dive into those sections and then you start working on that. So we can't change context by changing everything. We need to focus, move the needle, then assess the new state of the new equilibrium, and then do it again. So it's an ongoing process, basically.
Right. I love the fact that you have taken, so 2 things with that. From my perspective as an organizational growth and leadership consultant, right, that I've done this, again, like you shared, serving in the military. So we come from that military place where there is a different degree of risk. There is a different levers and powers of leadership and how that plays out, right? When you're talking about literally saving lives and then you move into this other context over here. So I thought that first part that you said, I thought was very valuable because not all organizations are the same. Therefore, not all levels of risk are the same. Not all levers of leadership influence that you're using is the same. So I love that because you're right. Most people look for the 5 steps to be an effective leader. And we have all these really great memes and posts, but the reality is it's not like that. And I think there's empathy for the leader who's in that environment, who's like, I'm actually really overwhelmed and I'm actually really confused. Or like I was sharing, I had a consulting call this morning. So it's like this organization is in a heavy state of growth. There is a high degree of risk because it's like, hey, if we don't make money, if we don't get investors, the company's closing. That's a radically different environment than, say, someone who's in a steady or established organization who has profit and all these things. So I love that you kind of shared that. And then I think the other part that I wanted to dig into a little bit more was when you said there are 30 different elements of this. So can you talk a little bit as you were going through your research? I'm thinking about the systems engineering or systems of systems approach that we talked about before, and this systems thinking mindset that leaders really have to put on. So how do we as leaders, how do we learn how to do this? Like you're saying, you got 75 pages of the book, you dig in, here's the framework. But then how does a leader start to kind of take all those 30 pieces and really put it in the practical application part?
First of all, it's a very crucial question because that is actually the challenge, right? And the second part is that it's not rocket science, but understanding the system. So an organization is a complex adaptive system, reproducing its path dependence. So the way it's going, reproducing that by the behaviors, the structures, the impacts, how we respond to the external environment. And taking a systems thinking approach to that, we will be focusing very much on the reinforcing and stabilizing loops in the organization. That's important. But when we as leaders, from a practical point of view, want to do something about it. So how do I improve our quality levels in a manufacturing? How do I improve the decision making in the front line in a dispersed organization? How do I make sure that the global process ownership actually works across an international organization? All of these practical challenges. Then we need a bit of a different approach because it's a bit like cooking. So if I look into the pot, then I taste the course that I'm trying to produce. Then I say it needs something. I need to adjust it. Then I look at the possibilities. I've got different ingredients I can put in. And I know the ingredients. I know my different spices. I know the different ingredients. So I add something. I stir a bit. And then I let it take effect a bit. And then I taste again. So that means that when we want to influence an organization, we shouldn't be focusing on all the cooking processes. We should be focusing on, if this is going on and I want more of this, I want more empowerment in the front line. I want more discipline in the global process. I want more learning, continuous learning in the quality assurance processes. Then I need to look at that and say, what are the drivers behind that? How can I identify the drivers? And how can I add some of that? And adding some of that in an organization, that's by, first and foremost, involving people in driving the cultural change that supports discipline culture, empowerment culture, or more of a continuous learning culture, which is the three things we just talked about. Or I can scaffold that, create carrying waves in the organization by centralizing certain decisions, by formalizing certain processes, by raising the interdependency between different parts, breaking down silos. These are some of the structures. So what we can do as leaders is that we can identify what's the output we want more of. And then after that, one step back. And then the book helps you identify, I can do some of this, some of this, some of this. And here's the recipe for involving people and moving that. And then we taste the course again. And then we see, are we getting more quality? Are we getting more decisions in the front line? Or whatever organizational functioning we are trying to strengthen. So the practicality of influencing a system, a complex adaptive system, is by focusing on the factors, identifying the few crucial ones, and then influencing them through leadership, and then let that take effect, and then stabilize, and then you do it again. This is the underlying understanding of organizational learning that also underpins Lean, Six Sigma, Scrum, all of those approaches, right?
Yeah, I think it's important what you said. I'm just thinking through practical application for the leader who's like, I don't know what the elements are. I want a result. I think I know what my result is. I want to increase revenue and build healthy teams. We have these general strategy kind of walk down the hallway. There's a vision statement. But I think, how does a leader get from that big part of big picture? And then, like you're saying, I'm looking at what's working or not working. What tools or frameworks would you offer for that person to be able to identify what are those elements that are actually in play? Because I think most of the time we don't really know what's under the surface.
So you're identifying and pinpointing a void in most leadership approaches. There's a wide agreement that leaders should set targets or objectives or purpose or vision if we're at the very high level, and that they should then lead from those objectives. But understanding how you translate those objectives into desired workplace behavior. What is the behavior that drives those results? That's the first link of becoming a contextual effective leader. So in the book, we have 4 intentions. We've got a purpose intention, fulfilling the purpose of the organization. We've got the stability and efficiency intention, which is driving repeatability and stable performance. We've got the innovation and change intention, which is about creating new foundation for future business or step changing the organization. And then we've got a people and relation intention, which supports the 2 others, right? Now, in the book, we lay out the approach to analyzing those and translating them into observable behavior in the organization. So in research, there is a very deep and wide research into workplace behavior, productive and counterproductive behavior. That means that when I, as a leader, I take the parts of the strategy that apply to my department and me, and the parts of the operating model that applies to my department and me, then I translate that into desired performance behavior. Now, what I can do is I can involve teams in asking for more of this behavior, and we can involve them in interpreting. How can we make commitments in moving towards more of this behavior? Those commitments, that's the bedrock of driving organizational learning towards a culture where the most important performance behaviors become embedded in the culture. The more employee turnover, the more growth you have, the more you integrate people from the outside, the more important this becomes. And that means that translation from organizational intentions to actual focused work performance behavior that I can ask for. I can change role requirements. I can talk to people about this. That link is absent in most leadership frameworks, and it's a key discipline. So what the book does, it connects the whole workplace performance research with the strategic research of which objectives exist. So how do you make that bridge?
That's why I love it. I mean, just from my perspective, I love the book. I love the framework. I love how you've laid that out because it is such a complex thing, like you're saying. And I think we know that at surface level, we know that it's hard, but we don't have the language, to your point, to really identify what are the elements that are at play. And the more we can become educated with a common language, right, then we as organizations across the board grow together. So I love frameworks.
You talk about language, right? The language is an important part because we all lead based on our mental models. So we've got a perception of the world, and that forms the basis for our decisions. So one of the things that's very important for a leadership team is to form a shared language about the most crucial performance drivers in the organization, because that allows us to start talking about how do we get more of that? What are the barriers that hinder that performance to emerge? We can ask for it in our people development dialogues. We can embed it into the company values. We can make sure that when we do strategy updates, we make it evident what is the behaviors we want more of in the organization. And if you don't build a language around that, if you don't activate the company values into behavioral requirements, if the leaders are not building a shared way of talking about outcomes of leadership, what happens is that it's very much left to the interpretation of the individuals. And that interpretation always takes place. So you will also see in the book that we start with a few fundamentals of leadership. One of them is that language is fluid and perceptions are fluid. So if I, as a leader, do not invest myself in managing expectations and clarifying expectations, then I'm not forming the basis for involving and empowering people and moving them towards a better place for the organizations to support performance. So I just wanted to pick up on the language part because you're pinpointing something very important.
I think that's really powerful when you say that about back to the intentions, right? Because we talk about clarity in leadership a lot, or I do. I see that as like one of the most important things as leaders is clarity and expectation management and that iterative communication cycle where we're like, call, respond, acknowledge, this back and forth. I said something, you responded. Did I acknowledge that was what I had originally intended, right? So that we have this effective communication loop, and we break down in communication all the time. So I think that's really powerful. But I think where I find that indifferent, your book and the framework, is back to the intentions, because we don't really talk about intentions in organizations that I have been a part of, right? We talk about goals, we talk about mission, vision, values, but there are all of these intentions under the surface. So I think that's very powerful. As you've done the research or you've shared this book, what are some of the most aha moments that you found, either for yourself when you were doing your research and writing and through your doctorate, or as you've released the book? What are some of those? Have you gotten some feedback on these like aha moments where people are like, oh, okay, this was what I needed to change my leadership journey?
Yeah, so you can say that I had a long string of aha moments during the doctorate, because at the time that I did the doctorate, I had been a leader myself for more than 25 years in very different contexts. And I've been doing leadership development, organizational development for more than 20 years when I started the doctorate. So diving deep into leadership research, I did a very deep analysis that took 2 years of range of studies to capture what do we know about context. That was across 7 different research strands, only to come out with saying, okay, here's a gross list of all the factors that have been identified and found in research to have a significant impact on performance and on leadership. And that was the starting point for doing the global leadership context study. So during that process, I had a lot of aha moments. Now, after releasing the book, I must say that now a year ago, I had the first people, leaders, senior leaders, read the book in the first versions. and got a lot of reactions on that. And one of the things that kept coming back was that this about understanding that it's a complexity we're looking at, but I need to go from complexity to simplicity because I need to offer my organization simplicity. But the complexity is there. So there is no way around starting from complexity and arriving at simplicity. Because if you go to simplicity and say, but I've tried this in another organization, these are the key levers, let's do that here also. There's a big risk that you fail or you don't get the optimal output. So the practice that you have experienced in one organization, if you carry that into another organization, you might fail. And one of the most evident feedbacks that I've had is the cultural side. So 2 levels of cultural experience. One is the national cultures. The differences in the national cultures has a huge impact on how people perceive that we should be making decisions, that we should be collaborating, that we should focus on deadlines and time, and how we should consider rules and regulations compared to relations. So this part of the people composition, a lot of leaders fed back saying that's really a significant experience for us, but equally important. Many leaders talk about the company culture and have a very hard time getting their hands around it. So when you land in a new organization, understanding the company culture. And what the research has supported for many years is that we have got different subcultures related to functions in the organization. So we've got a part of the culture that regulates how we collaborate. We've got a part of the culture that regulates how we voice our opinions. Do we raise our voice? Is there a high level of psychological safety so that we say if we are in doubt, do we raise our voice? We've got a part of the culture which is about the discipline. So do we actually follow the rules and regulations and procedures? Or is that more like, well, not so much? And that means that one of the real repeated feedbacks is that the book lays out 12 subcultures and allows you an approach to identify the 3 or 4 of those that has the most significant impact compared to the organizational intentions and the performance behavior we want in the organization. And then the book provides you with a very, very practical approach to influencing those cultures, shaping those cultures, and creating ownership in the organizations around those cultures. And that's a really heavy performance driver. So that is the most repeated feedback. And the ones that have been reading the books are senior leaders that have been in very many different organizations and are leaders that have different functions or different business units. And they realize that it's different parts of the culture that we need to enhance, enforce, and work with in manufacturing, in sales and marketing, in procurement, and so forth. That might be the most repeated aha moment that's the feedback from the readership, right?
Yes, I thought that was very insightful too whenever I went through the book, the subcultures that you identified, because you're right, we do teach and talk a lot about culture in organizational leadership, but I don't know that I had seen it broken out that way ever before with just that very specific, all of these other subcultures that are going on, things I had never personally ever even considered that were influencing behaviors in the organization, the dynamics. So super powerful. Do you want to talk a little bit about the assessment tool and the development of that? Because everybody loves a good assessment tool. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So the assessment tool is the Leadership Context Inventory. It's an online survey. You fill it in based on your perception of the context that you're in. Then what I've done is that 2 things about the survey. The first thing is that everything in the book is backed by research. That also meant that in all the different components that ended up in the book, there is a deep insight into the research. That also allowed me to identify all the different measurement tools we have in workplace research, in cross-cultural research, in climate research, in organizational research. So I collected all those items from those different survey instruments. Then when I wrote the book, I made a survey and ran a statistical validation study involving more than 400 leaders across the globe to validate the statistical validity and reliability of the tool. So I went through a couple of iterations, did the statistics on it, and try to reduce the frame so that it's doable. It takes about 20 minutes to fill in. At the same time, the research has shown a lot about saying, so if you're very low on formalization, there are some recommendations that you should consider. So what the leadership context inventory does is that based on your answers, it produces graphs measuring the organizational intentions, what's most important in your organization based on your answers, the external environment factors, the structures factors, and the culture factors. And then it comes up with recommendations you should consider to strengthen your discipline culture, because it seems that your efficiency and stability and tension is very strong. At the same time, I have identified, based on your answers, that your focus and ambition culture is very strong. So repeat that, retain that focus, but also be aware that if you take that too far, there are these drawbacks. So the inventory comes in two different versions. A short version, which gives you the graphical overview, and then 2 pages of very short input on, this is your status, consider doing this. And then a long version, which gives you a 16-page elaborate report, drawing on the insights in the book and coming up with concrete recommendations on, based on your specific scores, this seems to be the state of the union on this factor, on formalization or interdependence or workforce dispersion. So consider this from a leadership perspective. This might be worth considering strengthening. Be aware that if you have such a strong setting on this, very high risk intensity or very open system, be aware that these are risk factors or this you need to consider. So that means that what you get is that you get a very elaborate diagnosis. And what you can do after that is then say, but I'm going to pick those 2 or 3 things that the survey result says is most important. Then I'm going to work on those. So what the leadership context inventory is that it does is that it provides you a shortcut to handling the complexity and provide you very explicit recommendations on what you should be considering and working on. So do the leadership context inventory, take the results into your leadership team, discuss that, choose what to work on a few crucial factors, make that a part of your leadership over the next quarter or 2, get back to it, repeat the discussion so that you move the needle in your organization bit by bit. The same if you're in a merger or in an acquisition. The same if you're changing organizations, understanding the new culture. For recruiters, doing this analysis of the current culture and having a dialogue with the hiring organization about which part of your context do you want to sustain and which parts do you need to change, creates a very strong foundation for recruiting the right candidate that can help move that part of the context, because we can recruit based on their contextual experience. That's what's the aim of the tool. And what happens is when you buy the book, at the back of the book, you've got a code in each book that allows you to access a free version of the leadership context inventory, try it out for free, and then see, you can do your diagnosis so you can use that in conjunction with the book. So you really get the toolbox delivered when you buy the book.
I think it's phenomenal. Yeah, I definitely would consider this to be a toolbox. That is for sure. It's about as heavy as one. No, I'm just kidding. It was great. When I got it in the mail, I was like, wow, this is a powerful book. So let's go back to the tool. And when we talk about who is it best used for, so I'm thinking through, I can see the value in this context inventory and all of these things for an organization that's more established, right? But did you find in your research that this is valuable for maybe one of those companies in the first 1 to 3 years, or it's a company that's in a really high degree of growth? Like you're saying, you mentioned mergers and acquisitions, high degree of change. There's a lot going on in the organization, right? So how does this help those types of organizations who are already in a very high risk or high state of change, high stress environment?
So if we take the 2 parts, the first part, which is very small organization in the early stages of their growth, they should really focus on making sure that they get their value creation right. And once they start building organization, then the contextual perspective becomes important. But in the first stages, your value creation under control and make that succeed. And then when you start adding people and you reach, 30, 40, 50 people, then the contextual perspective becomes important. But where it really takes effect is when we go to large organization where we've got different departments, different functions, different value streams, or different business units. Then it's a really significant performance driver. So if we take the merger scenario, so in a merger scenario, you've got a receiving organization and you've got an organization that's being taken over, or you've got two organizations that come together. What's crucial for merger success is that we do work on what is the target picture of the way the organization should be performing, rather than handling the alignment as we go along. And that means that the leadership team that is heading up the merger needs to sit down and say, the purpose of this merger, what we want out of it, is access to those markets, leveraging both those value streams, acquiring this technology and embedding it and getting the benefits of those two technologies together. And then they need to start working on the structures and the cultures and the people composition that they are taking over. That's some, and compare that to the external environment, those organizational intentions. So when they build this language, they do this diagnosis, and they communicate clearly about where they want to go. They get a unique opportunity of rallying those two organizations in creating that future picture. And in cross-cultural research, national cross-cultural research, you've got kind of two different approaches. You can either try to bridge cultural differences by understanding one side, one culture, and the other side, the other culture, and then try to reconcile that and find a best third way. That's one way. The other way is to say we've got a multi-ethnical composition here, so the bridging approach doesn't work. So we need to build a new common ground, which is our aspiration of how we want to work. Then we involve the people, the different business units in driving in that direction, and they interpret what they need to do more and less of, because they've got the insight. They arrive at commitments, and we make overlaying commitments in the organization. That means that you use the organization as an agent in creating the future picture. And will that be absolutely perfect? Nope. But we'll go in the right direction. So the whole thesis in the book is based on the practical experience and the research support that if you want to drive a desirable future with success, you need to mobilize the organization in creating that, but you need to do that based on very clear framing from the leaders that are trying to lead and clear principles, clear priorities. Then you can shape the future. Yeah. So in immersion, if you take the other approach where you kind of try to merge two organizations and then handle the different discrepancies as you go along, that's the reason that research again and again and again show that we've got a very low success rate in mergers. Whereas the other approach mobilizes and empowers the two organizations to join forces and arrive at, it's not perfect, but it's much, much better than taking the approach of trying to sew it together and handle the problems as we go along.
Yes, no, and I think in that scenario where you're like handling it it's almost like the strongest arm wins, right? So you've got these two organizations or 3 or 4 that are coming in with the existing teams and the existing cultures and the existing processes. And I've seen it at where it's almost like the one that's the most dominant or the loudest or the most powerful is like, we're going to stay doing exactly what we've been doing. You guys have to come alongside and get in the boat. And so the weaker side invariably is kind of like their voice is lost, and all of that beautiful, wonderful creativity or whatever it is that that company is bringing to the table does often get lost because it's just like, no, we're going to keep doing this way and everyone else has to just get in line. So I love that.
And you can say that contextual leadership is not suggesting that a merger is always 50% of this, 50% of that, and that's the future practice. Not at all. But there are 2 levers in effective contextual leadership in matching the context. One is opening and closing leadership. Closing leadership is saying, but this is the way we operate. That's not up for discussion. These are standard operating procedures. This is the way it runs, period. Opening is allowing recreation, remodeling, innovation, and so forth. So in a merger, what's important is that we create clarity about what's closed. So we help a very large international organization that done very large acquisitions. And they are very clear on the system side we will use these systems and we will implement them immediately in order to reap the benefits of that. Then on the people side, on the collaboration side, on how you approach the market in the different local markets, how do you collaborate with the customers? The game is more open. And we go through iterative processes of forming the new way of collaborating in that country. So you can easily have one side that's totally closed, fully aligned. That's not up for discussion. At the same time as you empower and share leadership and make people create their new future. But it's the clarity around that. So you need a language around it. You need to explain, why is it totally closed over here? Why is it that we open and involve over here? That part of the contextual sensitivity is what you do with the book, is that you build that approach and you don't talk about everything that's up for discussion. You talk about the few crucial performance drivers. And then when people raise all the other things, we simply say, we've decided that this is that's the fast track. It's not up for discussion. And if we are going to change this, we'll build experience first. So we are not opening that discussion the first year. But this, we need to co-create. We need to develop together. We need to reap the benefits of the best of the both organizations.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so helpful. Yeah, because it's definitely not one size fits all, like you're saying. Yeah. And I go back to as you were saying, open versus closed leadership. I just thought through like the underlying emotions that are involved in that. So when we talk about open leadership model or approach, then I ask myself, what's at play behaviorally or emotionally or psychologically in the person that limits or stops us from doing that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So there's no doubt that person-to-person influence, compassion, empathy, understanding the people that we lead, that is the centerpiece of leadership. No doubt about that. But in the old days, we had a lot of discussion about management or leadership. In the practical world, you can't distinguish that like this, because you need to understand that the leadership range, the piano, if you will, we need to be able to play as leaders, is on one side, compassion and people-to-people leadership, being assertive around certain things, arriving at commitments, managing expectations, aligning expectations. And on the other side, I need to shape the structures. I need to build the procedures. I need to establish standards for quality, for safety, for customer service. And these standards, that's part of the leadership piano. The way I build my processes, the way I decentralize or centralize decisions, which is all structural. That also influences the behavior and the engagement in the organization. So what I want to do is that I want to look at the organization, and then I want to say, this is what we want to achieve. We want superior customer service. We want very fast response. We want innovation locally. Okay. Then I translate that into the behavior I want. I translate that into the structural elements that may support that, the cultural elements, and the way I lead the people. So that means that becoming an effective contextual leader also entails understanding that person-to-person leadership is a crucial part, but it's not enough. Also need to look into the structural and cultural elements and be active agents in shaping that. The more you lead leaders, lead organizations, lead enterprises, the more important it becomes. And that also means that if you are a frontline leader, you will very often be leading in context, and you don't have so many contextual handles to shape. You have some, but not so many. But as you will see in the book, the further we move up, start leading leaders or organizational units, all of a sudden we get more power, more mandate to influence the setup. And there are still things that we can't, that's not in my mandate. And that's absolutely cool. So in the book, we talk about the action zone. You and I can decide and initiate, and we've got the mandate, we've got the obligation. We've got the influence zone. I can raise that to another manager. I can talk to another department about that. I can collaborate with external partners to change our processes. I can influence it. And then we've got operating conditions, which is outside my mandate. I can't change that. I need to recognize it. I need to accept it. And then I need to respond to it. Some of them I need to mitigate. Some of them I need to leverage. And that assumption about requisite response, so external environment that I can't change, I need to understand that. And then in my organization, have the requisite agility, have the requisite risk readiness. So I've got on all the external factors, I've got a requisite response. And the book lays out what are the cultural components, what's the people composition, what are the structures that best respond to a very dynamic environment, a very external complex environment, a high risk intensity, a workforce dispersion. Again, it's not about boiling the ocean, but if you are leading an organization that's spread across hundreds of miles or across 7 different countries, then we can turn that around and say, then we know which leadership is most effective in that context. So you need to consider that. And that's what the book does. Don't boil the ocean, but try to find a few ones and then dive into those.
Yeah, no, I think it's so good. And I really appreciate, again, back to the framework and the work that you've done in taking all of these disparate tools that I see from my perspective in the leadership coaching and organizational coach world, landscape, SWOT analysis tool or strategic planning or this or that. And so you've taken all of these tools, which are vital for organizations to be effective and for people to grow, which I think is where the heart of most leaders is at. Like, I do genuinely believe that most leaders, whether they're leading an army of one or thousands, they do genuinely care, right? They do want the team to be successful. They do care about the people standing on the left and right of them. But the environment, and like you had so eloquently said, the complexity is so big and so dynamic at times that it's almost impossible to see the entire chessboard at play. I love that you have done that. So for a person, they can get the book, they can get the QR code to take the test, to take the inventory assessment. And then how does your consulting company kind of support this? Is this a tool you use in your consulting program? And how does that fit together?
So we do bespoke organizational development, bespoke leadership training. We build global leadership academies where we help the companies find out what's most important from a leadership perspective in the different parts of your organization, convert that into tools and training. And the whole notion, the whole reason for starting the research and for writing the book is that I am on a mission to make leaders and leadership developers and recruiters and coaches build that contextual awareness to help the organizations to arrive at simplicity, but the right levers, the right approaches. And that means that what we do in the consultancy is that we do executive coaching, we do management team development, organizational development, or we build leadership programs. We deliver all over the world, so we've got delivery capacity in China, Brazil, US, the Nordic countries, and so on with partners. And we always start together with the organization with what they have. It's never a clean sheet. So the framework is not competing to your existing leadership principles or behaviors. It's not competing to the choices that you have taken. We are using this change framework, or we are using this approach to compassionate leadership. Or no, what it does is that it allows us to identify where are the levers that you might not be enforcing enough right now. And then together we find out that these are the components that will add in and connect with what you're doing already. It is our task as leadership developers, as HR and as senior leaders to make the life of the leaders in the front line and the middle management, make their life easy, make it simple to understand, use a uniform and aligned language around what we do so that we don't leave them with the confusion and complexity that makes it harder to influence people. That's the approach that we take at Danita.
I love it. That's so good. So for the person who is sitting today listening to this, how do they know that they need your book or that they need to, reach out to you? Like, what's the pain point that they're feeling right now today as they're listening to this, where they're like, I definitely need this tool in my life?
The contextual challenges can be from the external environment or from the internal environment. So a very good hallmark of whether do I need to pay attention to and start working with the context is when we don't really think that we can get the organizations to perform the way we would like them to perform. We're not quite getting the quality we want because people are not really making the quality assurance processes run. We're not really getting the safety levels we want. We're not really getting the decisions in the front line. We're not getting the customer service we want. So everything that's about the organizational behavior driving value, as soon as you see we can't really make that come together, because that's the outcome of leadership. we shouldn't be measuring leaders on what they are doing. We should be measuring leaders on what their organization is doing and how they convert what we're trying to create, the value we're trying to create, how they convert that into daily behavior. And that's the starting point. And if you're doing large organizational change, if you're doing growth, if you're doing mergers or acquisitions, or if you are seeing what many organizations see, difficulties in ramping up or ramping down because you've got growth or fluctuations, or you've got trouble integrating different parts of the organization, or integrating leaders that you recruit into the organization. All of these come back to contextual settings, right? And if you're in doubt, I would recommend going to the contextualleader.com. Here you can freely download the two first chapters. Have a look at those. And if it rings a bell, then you might need the book. If you're still in doubt whether do I need the book, well, you could write me a direct mail. I'm sure that the context data will be available. But the first two chapters is a very good starting point for saying, is it relevant? By the way, you can also get the book. It's out as audio books. So if you are one of those listening and then finding out where to dive in, that's also an opportunity.
Yes, but if you get the audiobook, you might miss these really great graphics in here, which, by the way, I love. That was my personal question. Did you design those graphics in all of the frameworks?
Yeah, so the graphics in the book, it's very important for us to create pictures that are easy to use. So all the graphics in the books can be drawn on a flip chart or on a whiteboard when you are in the discussions. That was the aspiration with it. When you buy the book, the QR code on the back of the book allows you a free PowerPoint with all the figures you can download, use in your consulting practice or in your internal training, because my ambition is to get this used, to integrate it into what you're already doing. So it's not like this is the framework you need to work with. You can pick and choose, use the components. That's the aspiration.
Yeah, that's so good. Yes, I think it is, again, a great tool for anyone, like you said, who is invested their life, professional life in leading organizations and teams. And again, I think we genuinely all every day get up and try to be a little bit better today than we were yesterday. So I can't say enough about it. So we'll share all those links in the show notes for everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Norby, for your committed work to the science and models of leadership and helping organizations grow. I love that you said that was your mission, really, to get out there and make such a powerful difference in the world. I have no doubt that your book will definitely do that, and all the work that you've done. So thank you for coming on the show today. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. The pleasure has really also been mine. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. We need more contextual leadership in the world. So thank you very much for this opportunity, Danita.
You're welcome. Hey friends, thanks for listening. I hope that you had an amazing time learning all of the tools and techniques that Dr. Norby has. If you are a leader in your organization and you are trying to get your arms around this very complex organizational growth and leadership model, I highly encourage you to check out his website, The Contextual Leader, or grab his book on Amazon. It is packed full of tools and tips and techniques that we can use as leaders, like he said, in order to be more successful, to bring clarity to our teams, to reduce that level of complexity and really get after the most important thing that we need to be focusing on today in order to make our teams and our organizations better. So highly encourage it. If you have not already signed up for the Interested to Lead newsletter, please pop over to danitacummins.com/podcast so that you can sign up to get all the latest tools and tips. And in 2025, we are focusing on faith-driven leaders to help equip and empower you to be successful, to grow healthy organizations. Make sure you're signed up to get all the tools and tips that you need in order to be a successful leader. Have an amazing day. Don't forget to keep showing up every day, even when it hurts, because you matter. All right, friends, I'll see you later. Have an amazing day.